right? So it's separated. This socket allowed us to push only on the bottom half while the top half could lift off. So we didn't want to push on this part. We would have been driving it back together. So we put this through. You see it actually can go all the way through so that we could then isolate the two halves. So just to remind you, we have this side with the bearing. It's smooth, except the fact that this is rattling around. We have this lower part that actually has your magnetic clutch right here. Hopefully you can hear that. When this was on the mower, as soon as you would start the mower, this would start going a little slowly, not because the blades were engaged, but because the movement of the piece above it, this piece, and just the drag on this spindle sleeve would actually cause this to just move a little bit. You would hear this sound as the engine was running. So we need to drive this bearing out of here. We're going to take a 26 impact. It's about just the right size to only press on the inner spindle part of the bearing. We're going to try to drive the spindle down out of the bearing. We're going to use these to hold up. We're going to go like this so that we can pound, but this piece can come up. I don't know if you can tell. We're going to give ourselves some depth sockets so that this piece can lift out while the metal plate stays. See if this works. It's not the most steady contraption. Success. Now, what you'll notice, the spindle's missing. If we lift this up, we have our support sockets that we had put on our nuts that work perfectly. We'll save those for later. Now we have our spindle or inner bearing race. There's nothing wrong with this because it's a built piece. In here we have our bearing. Wow. It sounds even worse now that the inner race is out of it. So we're going to try to knock this out. I don't know if it'll be very easy because what you can hardly see is that there's these little areas like there with the lighting, right? And there that it looks like they hammered it so that bearing would stay in. So as we pound, we'll be overcoming that. But really, we don't have an option because we have to replace the whole thing if this doesn't work. So it's gonna work. It just won't be quite as smooth as pounding the other part. So this is the magnet in here, electromagnet. Power gets supplied, magnetizes this, it sucks this piece, boom, on, and then you then have a solid link for your blades. So let's try pounding this one out. You see, I'm just finding a socket that can fit correctly. just the bearing now. We have the part to put the bearing in. So we're gonna find a new bearing. Now pressing it in, we're gonna be a lot gentler, obviously. But the good news is this bearing is serviceable. The whole piece costs $250 online, okay? This bearing won't cost probably $20 or $30. So you're gonna pay yourself around $200 in labor hours to do this job. To me, it's worth it to try because I don't readily have this piece available. And even if you do, should you really change it when you could just change this bearing? And even if you had this top piece, there's a snap ring here. You would just drive the bearing out on that one the same way. You would drive down on this spindle, and then you would hold this pulley and drive the bearing out. We don't have to do that because this bearing is very smooth. But this is serviceable, even though they say it's not, and they won't sell it to you as a complete kit. Or they won't sell it to you separate. They sell it to you as a complete pre-assembled kit. But you can service it by yourself at home with a hammer, a few sockets, and a little bit of know-how from this video. Alright, so we've now pressed in our new bearing. You could hammer it in if you were careful. You could hammer it down into the bottom piece first and then hammer this top piece down on. It's totally possible. I just didn't want to risk it because I'm in Uganda and these bearings are not common. Here's what it sounds like with the new bearing. As you can tell, it's very quiet, quite a bit of difference from the old bearing. And it's kind of odd because the old bearing didn't even look that bad. But it sounds bad. And it sounds like it's actually dry inside the sealed bearing in it. The new one is perfect. So now it's time to put it back together. So we need to put this piece back onto here. This will just require us to pound it on gently, right? Because we just have a spacer. This piece here is just a spacer. It's not like a, it's not anything that has to sit down in very far. So we're just gonna tap it on. Actually gonna try to just push, but it's not going by just pushing, which isn't a surprise. I put my finger and try to make sure the gap has closed between the two pieces. It's really good. So now we need to put on our, see, I think this only goes one way. Yep, I'm gonna put on our springs. fasteners on. $14mm. No, these bolts, there's no specification that I know of. Now, I haven't done an exhaustive search or anything. So what we're gonna measure here is the gap between these two. And hopefully you can see that. So we're between these pieces, you have your clutch clearance. I don't have like the specification for that, so I just counted how many threads are showing at the top of each bolt. I'm tightening it back to the same amount. So it's not very scientific, but because these are not technically rebuildable per Husqvarna, and we're faced with just getting it really, really close. Freely spinning. So what's the measurement? The measurement is tighten it till it's touching and then back it off until it's freely spinning. I wish I had a better answer with like a thousandths gauge or something, but then again, we're kind of doing this video to prove you can do it at home with no special tools. Because it's just a mower and you're dealing with a magnetic clutch, as long as it's not touching each other inside here, you will be okay if you have any clearance at all. What you'll have a problem with is if you have too much clearance. So because we took it down till it touched and then backed it off like a half turn or till it's just spinning clean, we're gonna be just fine. It's gonna have plenty of power to engage that small distance and turn the belts on. You can see it's very quiet, but that wasn't our problem. It was this one last time. You can see it's very quiet. So you can rebuild this bearing at home by yourself, doing it just like I showed you.